Hello, friends. Here we are living in the light, and we're going to continue finishing the last part of this vow of discipleship. So let's pray together. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master Paramahansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, we bow to you all. Help us to attune ourselves to your inward presence, that we may know we are not alone in this world, that you are always with us, listening and guiding and blessing, comforting, supporting. We are your children. We depend upon you completely. Take us home, guide our steps, bring us into thy eternal realm of bliss. Om. Peace. Amen. Well, friends, we are in the very last parts of this. Actually, I don't need glasses. We're in the very last part of this vow. Discipline me, guide me, purify me. These are the words that we have today. I'm going to start with the word discipline. I don't know if I'll get past it or not. Discipline is, when you think about the word disciple, you hear disciple and discipline is going together. In India, there's another word for disciple, and that word is chela. And the relationship of the word chela is to the word child. You can hear that. So when you become a chela, you become a child of the guru. You become the guru's own. And you also become, in your life goes into the hands of the guru. And it goes out of your own. There's a wonderful story about Sri Ramakrishna, who was an avatar who lived in the late 1800s in India, in Calcutta, not far from where Master lived. Ramakrishna died just before Master was born, 1893. And Ramakrishna was very, well, through him, the Vedanta teachings of self-realization came to the West, and it was through his disciple Vivekananda that the teachings came to the West. Vivekananda came about in the early 1900s to America. He spent a few years here, but then he went back to India. Yogananda Master was the first to come and stay. Vivekananda came, Swami Ramatirtha came to America, but both came and left. Where Yogananda came and made his life here. But every movement, it's just literally waves coming into the beach. So that just a wave comes in, and finally the whole tide is turned. Master came. By the time Master came, the tide was really beginning to turn. And now we live in a world where not everyone follows these teachings, but even in the West, they're exceedingly well known. So the story, one of Ramakrishna's disciples, a very famous disciple of his, was named Girish Ghosh. Girish Ghosh was a famous playwright in Bengal. He's considered to be the father of Bengali theater. I don't know these histories, but I know it from Ramakrishna. But he was very well known. He was a genius of an artist. He was also an absolutely typical bohemian artist type. He was a libertine and indulged himself in countless ways. He was sort of a wild man. He was also, in his extravagant way of being, when he became devoted to Ramakrishna, he became one of Ramakrishna's chief advertisers. He was his marketing agent. He was the first to declare Ramakrishna an avatar and insisted to everyone that Ramakrishna was a great soul, even when Ramakrishna's behavior was such that people thought he might be a madman because he was so eccentric in the way he expressed himself. That's a whole story. There's many wonderful books about Ramakrishna. One of the very first ones I read, which I recently reread, and it still stands up beautifully, is by Christopher Isherwood. Christopher Isherwood was a well-known writer, And this book now is 50 or 60 years old. It was one of the first biographies of Ramakrishna. And if you've never read about him, I highly recommend it. But Girish Ghosh threw himself at Ramakrishna's feet and wanted to be a disciple. And so Ramakrishna tried to guide him, and he said, well, every morning and every night, you should meditate and you should pray. And Girish said, but Master, he said, sometimes I stay up for 3 days when the inspiration is on me. I just write and write, and I don't go to sleep at normal hours, and then I'll sleep for a day and a half. I have no regularity, I just can't set aside that kind of time. And then Ramakrishna suggested, that once a day he say this mantra, and then Girish told him he just really didn't think he could do that. And he just suggested just sort of 3 or 4, and each one was smaller and smaller and smaller. And Girish he said, I can't promise any of that because his life was so unpredictable and irregular. And when the creative muse was on him, he was completely outside of himself, and he just wouldn't even know what would happen. He wasn't crazy. He was just a very eccentric genius, is who he was. So finally, Ramakrishna said to him, give me your power of attorney, which I just love that phrase. I mean, this is all in Bengal, translated into English, Bengali. Give me your power of attorney. Well, power of attorney, which is, you may be familiar with it sort of in the legal terms because we talk about it. It's like, I may still be living and I may still be functioning, but all legal authority to determine my life, I hand to someone else. Someone else has power of attorney. They can direct your person. They can commit you to a mental hospital or to a convalescent home if they want to. They can direct your medical care. They can go into your bank accounts. They can purchase property and sell property in your name. It's like everything about your life you've actually given over to them. You no longer actually have decision making. So power of attorney is a really big thing to offer to someone, and you, of course, want to give it to someone you trust. There's countless stories that I've heard here and there of things that happened. A man told me a long, painful tale of giving power of attorney to his brother, and his brother basically bankrupted his company, just terrible things that happened. This was in 2 countries trying to make a family situation work. So there's real power there. But when Girish heard this, as opposed to having to do these rituals or these pujas or get up at it early in the morning and do this and this, just give Ramakrishna my power of attorney. Of course, you're completely trustworthy. So he said, I will. I have. And it wasn't literally, he didn't write it on a piece of paper, but in his heart, he gave power of attorney to Ramakrishna. And then years and years afterward, Girish would say, my master was so clever. He knew I didn't know what I was doing. And then what happened was just sort of inch by inch over many years, Ramakrishna just took control of his life. Just took over his life. And Girish it wasn't like he struggled against it. It was just he'd made this promise, which he thought was going to be easy. And in fact, in time, of course, Girish became a great saint because of the power of Ramakrishna. And it all began with that little bit. So when we say to the master, discipline me, so let's go back to what the word discipline is, because we're always having to work between these 2 realities, the disciple with that word discipline in there, and Chela with that word child. But then think about what the real responsibility of a parent is. Part of what happens to people is people think they're going to have a baby. And you do have a baby, and for a period of time, that baby is just a baby. But in a very short period of time, that baby manifests the fact that it's actually a person. And I was amused, when I would see people, children and babies are so cute, and most adults are not. It's just like, there it is, but there it becomes. As my father put it to me, actually rather poignantly. The child disappears into the adult. And that's, you have that. And I remember asking my mother once, just something about her life. I was just trying to get to know her as an adult person, which to my everlasting regret, I don't think I ever sufficiently did. But she said to me that the happiest time of her life, or one of the happiest, I don't want to put it so unequivocally, was when her three children were small, and she had us all to herself. That's how she put it. And it was very sweet because having a mother who felt that way, of course, was a great blessing in my life. She was a very devoted mother. There was never any sense that we were an intrusion. We were always who she was and who she wanted to be. But she had us all to herself. But she did not indulge us. She disciplined us, having us all to herself. And this is what I was wanting to say. Parenting is a job. It's not like a reward. It's not like a banquet that's been given in your honor. There is this definite responsibility that the parent has to carry out. And because we founded a school here at Ananda, Palo Alto, and I've been involved in that school for a long time, I've been involved a great deal with parents and their children, even though I'm not a parent myself. And, some parents intuitively understand what it is they're being asked to do. And other adults who have children have to work hard to begin to understand what that responsibility really is. And that responsibility involves discipline. It has to involve discipline. My sister, who raised a son, very strong-minded, fine person, grew up to be a very fine man, is a very fine man, partly because she was very attentive. And he was a rascal and a strong-willed, verbal person, as you might expect, being part of this family. And I remember when I was visiting my parents, who lived in the same town where my sister lived, and she was there with her son, and it was time for them to leave, and he was being his willful self, as he often was, and he wanted something that she was not going to give him. And I remember her looking at him, just looking at him like this and saying, "When I speak to you like this, have I ever changed my mind?" And he was thoughtful and logical, and he said, "No. And I assure you, this is not going to be the first time. It's never going to happen." "Oh," she said, "either you can cooperatively walk out to the car and we'll drive home. And when we get home, you can get out of the car and do whatever you want. Or I will carry you to the car. And when we get home, I will put you in your room and you won't be able to come out." Now, he was a very logical child, and he thought about these options and then walked out to the car on that particular occasion. But there was nothing the least bit unkind. It was that she knew that there were limits. And even though he had a very strong and willful opinion about what those limits ought to be, she didn't feel, and she didn't feel he was qualified to evaluate the situation properly. It wasn't that he wasn't intelligent or didn't have, good ideas, but when he reached the limit of his judgment, his proper judgment, she took over. And then she would hold the line no matter what. I'm going to tell you another because this was a very fun one. She takes responsibility for this, but this was a wonderful parenting. And then we'll bring this back to discipleship, but you can see it. They were in the car together. She was driving. He had a permanent marker pen in his hand. Now, she said her mistake was she should have said, "Hand me the pen." But she didn't say, "Hand me the pen." He was wearing his good shirt. He had his best shirt. And she said something like, "Don't be careful. Don't mark your shirt with that pen. It's permanent marker." She said she should have just asked for the pen. But he then just marked his shirt, to see if the principle was true. And she said, "Well, there you are. You've ruined your best shirt." She said, "What are we going to do?" And he said, Daddy will just buy me another one. And she thought, this is not good. This is not good that he can destroy something because Daddy's going to buy him another one. That's just not, you see, there are edges. Now we're talking children now, but still, there are edges. Now she says she was partly responsible, but still. So she decided that they would go get a new shirt, but he would pay for it because Daddy was not going to buy it. And he, at that time, was of an age, he had a piggy bank and it was full of coins, and money to him was quantity. The more coins there were, the richer he was. He hadn't really figured out the difference between a 25-cent piece and a 1-cent piece. So they went to Target or Walmart's or I think it was Target, some store like that. She took him to the right rack and, they picked out a shirt together that was approximately correct. And then they went up to the counter and they were going to have to buy it. So she pulled out his piggy bank and she dumped the coins out, and she knew because he liked quantity, she started with the pennies. And it was like a $7 or $8 shirt. So she's counting the pennies. And gradually he's beginning to understand that it's going to take most of his piggy bank, conceivably all of his piggy bank, to buy this stupid shirt. And he begins to get upset. He begins to scream. He begins to argue. He begins to kick. He begins to do all sorts of things. And she just, without budging, she just keeps counting the money until almost all of his piggy bank went into that shirt, and they put it in a bag. And, he's still kicking and screaming, and everyone is watching, but she's just determined. And then later, when she told me the story, she said, I said, well, did it work? She says, I'm not sure. Because ever afterwards, he would say, this is the shirt that I bought. So she said, maybe yes, maybe no. She wasn't really certain. But the part of it that I really liked was she didn't care. He was having a tantrum. He was having a fit. Actions have consequences. Okay? That's what it is. That's what it is when you're a parent. Actions have consequences. Because if a person grows up not understanding that actions have consequences, we're very, very confused for the rest of our lives. We really are, because until we start raising ourselves. I was raised twice. I was raised well by my parents, and I really appreciated that. Then I was raised a second time by Swami Kriyananda. And I often speak of having grown up at Ananda, but by that I mean my body grew up under my parents' care, but my consciousness, awakened to its potential through Swami Kriyananda. Of course, in my case, my parents helped prepare me for that. But this is what the master is there to do. He doesn't really care if we make the biggest scene in the world in the store, in the checkout line at Target. He doesn't care if the line sort of lines up behind us and everybody thinks that, he's the most terrible mother in the world. This is what we're doing. Actions have consequences. And there's a force at play in our spiritual evolution, which Master called the thwarting cross currents of ego. And this is one of the very confusing aspects of why the law of karma and the cause and effect as it works through our own consciousness is a little hard to understand, because none of us are clear cut. We're not all of one thing or all of another. We have a very complicated weave of different threads going in different directions. It's exactly like looking at the backside of a piece of embroidery or the backside of a weaving. The front side is very tidy and it comes together in a picture. The backside, you can't necessarily tell sort of where all those threads are going and where they start and where they end. And we can have certain qualities highly developed, and that we can use those qualities. The actual way I would put it is to say to outrun the immediate consequences of what we do. In the case of my sister and her son in that store, what my nephew had highly developed was logic, verbalness, loudness of voice, strength of will. I mean, these are all very good qualities. They weren't sufficient to overcome his mother's absolute determination. because she also had those same qualities. We are, after all, the same family. But those are very good qualities of his. And in this case, his good karma was that he couldn't get away from what was going on. But this is an example that I often use. It's like if you're a 6-year-old or a 12-year-old boy and you bully a 3-year-old, you'll get away with it because you're bigger and stronger and you can laugh and run away. You can knock him over on his bike and then just keep running and he can't do anything about it. But eventually that action will catch up to you. It's the boomerang that just takes time to come to you. But in the meantime, you can stave it off. You have the good karma to have money. You have the good karma to have power. And you misuse that money and you misuse that power. But you have developed the ego strength to have developed the ability to do that. And so the thwarting cross currents of that ego strength delay the response. This is not good news, because by the time the response comes to us, we don't always remember what caused it. That's why what we call instant karma is actually very, very, very good karma. Years ago, when I went to India, one of my very first trips, and we were less adept at dealing with our local guides, and often we had an idea of what our agenda should be, and they would have a different idea, and they would just assume we didn't know what we were doing, and so they would take us where they wanted to take us. And in Varanasi, we had this guide who stayed our guide for many years. I used to lead these pilgrimage, with several others, lead these pilgrimage trips to India for about 2 decades. We gradually worked it out very well with him. But on one of our early trips, he really wanted us to see this ancient Durga temple. And I, at least, really did not want to see this ancient Durga temple. Among other reasons, it was known locally as the monkey temple, because it was filled with monkeys. And Varanasi being a holy city, they couldn't just poison or shoot or trap these monkeys. Not that they should have, but they were trying to live in harmony with, God's world, and they just were very difficult to get rid of. So they just were there, and we sort of shared the temple with them. And it was a very, very ancient temple to the goddess Durga. I was less tuned in to the power of this is obvious. I was less tuned into the power of those things than I became, and this experience helped me. Also, for reasons I do not understand, there was an elderly pujari, a priest there, and I was one of the group leaders, and group leaders sort of get special attention. Group leader is kind of a phrase that we would hear in India. And so the pujari wanted to put this marigold garland around my neck. The problem with it is that it was well past its shelf life, and rotting marigolds have a particularly pungent smell. So I'm not fond of wearing the garland anyway, but he put it on me and it was slightly putrid. And so then every time he would turn his back, I would take it off and I would try to put it somewhere else. And he kept finding me and putting it back on me. And so that was the little subdrama that was going on, which was not making me happy. I was also crabby because I felt I'd lost control of the pilgrimage situation. I really wanted us to be somewhere else, and we were here, and I didn't know when we were going to get out of here. Because there were a lot of monkeys, and monkeys don't wear diapers, there was a lot of monkey poop all over the temple also, which to my Western eye, I didn't really enjoy it. And then there were sort of people with sticks kind of keeping the monkeys at bay. And then the temple itself was just old and sort of run down from my point of view, all of which I have since repudiated, but nonetheless, that's how I felt then. And so I was walking around filled with negative thoughts, just endless, just this whole negative tape was just going. and the goddess Durga was sort of included in my annoyance at that point. This was like 1986, India has changed a great deal, but especially in those early years, there would come a point where the Western way of doing things would just clash with the Indian way of doing things. And almost every Westerner, at least once on the 28-day pilgrimage, would have a breaking point, where most of the time you would just flow with it. It was just a different world and it was fine. But almost always you would come to some breaking point on something or another. That was my breaking point on that trip. So I'm sitting there thinking all these really negative thoughts, including not thinking much of Durga herself or this temple or anything. And I just wasn't paying attention. And when you're in a place with a lot of monkeys, you have to always be aware of where the monkeys are. You can't just walk casually. So I managed to walk between two groups of monkeys. So I had divided the group with my presence, which was not a good thing to do. And for reasons of his own, a monkey actually literally jumped on my back. The monkey on your back, he just jumped on my back, which was real scary. But instead of being scared, I was furious. And I was told later, and I vaguely remember doing this, I actually grabbed the monkey, pulled him off my back, and threw him on the ground and said, "Get off of me, you filthy thing," just like that. Then the monkey came back at me and took a bite of what he thought was me. But as it happened, I was wearing a skirt, so he actually took a bite of my skirt. Or he closed his teeth around my skirt. I mean, it could have easily been my leg. It just happened to have been my skirt. And then I'm just in this state. I'm still fighting with him. Let go, let go. I might have called him a filthy thing again and just was pulling on him. By this time, everybody in the temple has rushed over to where, the group leader from America is in a struggle for her life with one of these monkeys. And, they got the monkeys away. And the monkey just closed his teeth on my skirt and pulled a big piece of my skirt off with him. So there was a big hole there. But it was perfect. It was absolutely perfect. It's like, I heard Durga sitting on her lion just saying, "Don't mess with me, honey. I've been here so much longer than you, and I'll be here long after you're gone, and you are just a speck of dust in eternity." And I was absolutely 100%. Thank you, God. It was just, I behaved very badly, and I had the good karma to be just instantly told exactly what I was done in a very dramatic way that could have ended very badly. I could really have been seriously hurt in that whole thing. I had the good karma not to be, but I had the good karma to have it happen to me. Later, just to finish, I came back to America and I went to the fabric store and I got an embroidered decal of a monkey, which I sewed over the hole. And that I had clothes that I only wore on that pilgrimage trip, and that I wore the monkey skirt. I wore it for years. Every time I went to India, and every time I would look at it, it would say, I'd hear Durga say, "Don't mess with me, honey." Now, most of the time, we don't know why tough things happen to us, because our thwarting cross currents of ego have kept us going, and by now we don't remember, what we put out. But Divine Mother knows exactly what we need. Remember, this whole vow is to Divine Mother, through the Guru, through the representatives and guides of her line, of the line of gurus that have been sent to us. But she is there. She's watching our thoughts on such a level that we literally can't comprehend it. Swamiji talked about when he was far away from Master, he was demonstrating the yoga postures at a Jewish bar mitzvah. He sort of even now says he can't really think about why he was doing that. But anyway, there he was. And later he was talking with some of the guests, and the psychiatrist was sort of challenging the path that Swami was on. And Swami tried to persuade him of the validity of the path of self-realization by talking about all the miracles he'd witnessed. And the man was very skeptical. Swami, the way Swami tells the story, the psychiatrist was mentally booking Swami in for a session because he was obviously in need of psychiatric care. But Master wasn't anywhere. Master wasn't at the event. Swami had been sent. And later he's talking to Master, and Master just casually says, he says, "When you're with worldly people, better not talk about miracles." And Swami's response was, "You knew." Because there was no one there who could have even told. "You knew." And Master just looked at Swami, sort of like, "Of course I knew." And then he said, "I know every single thought you think." That's quite something. When Swami told that story once, I said, "Sir, is that still true? Does Master still know every single thought that his disciples think?" Swami then looked at me like, "How could you even ask that question?" And just said, "Of course." It's just, you don't know where to go with a thought like that. meaning it's just so far beyond our experience. So he's watching, he's always watching. And whenever he can, he steps in to discipline us. Discipline mean, like, because we're his chela, discipline means to help us to grow up into the light and become who he knows we were meant to be. So, my friends, God bless you.